What was Abimelech's conspiracy, and what did he do to accomplish this? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Judges 9 verses 1 to 6, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Judges chapter 9 verse 1, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Judges chapter 9, beginning at verse 1. Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our brother. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth-Milo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. In our last lesson, we concluded our look at the judge named Gideon. Gideon was a man of faith, as will be described in the book of Hebrews, but that doesn't mean he was a perfect man. In the beginning, his faith was weak, but grew as the Lord continued to work through him. After his victory, Israel wanted to make him a king, and his sons after him kings as well. Gideon refused, saying that the Lord would rule over Israel, showing us the strength of Gideon's faith. However, he did make an ephod after his victory that Israel began to worship. Now, I am certain that this was not Gideon's intention when he made it, but Gideon didn't destroy it, and it became a snare to his family and to Israel. God didn't want to be worshipped with things men made, and that is true here. Now, I don't believe Gideon was carried off in this sinful practice, for the passage gives us no indication that he did. But even still, making this ephod is something that Gideon shouldn't have done. We also learned that Gideon's family was very large, for he had many wives. One of those sons was Abimelech, a son of one of Gideon's concubines of Shechem. It is this Abimelech that we will be discussing in chapter 9. Chapter 8 ended with the death of Gideon, which according to our timeline brings us down to about 1144 BC. So as we transition to chapter 9, we note that from the language of the chapter, these events occur after the death of Gideon, so they cannot run concurrently with Gideon's judgeship. Israel has again gone off into idolatry, but we don't see the usual oppression that God sends Israel because of this. Instead, we see something entirely different. We see Israel, or at least northern Israel, set up a king. This king wouldn't, however, be anointed by God, as later King Saul would be. This king would be chosen by the men of Shechem in a process that was entirely evil. For the politics of the time, let's remember a couple things. Ephraim, because of Shiloh being within its territory, and because of Joshua coming from that tribe, considered itself to be the preeminent among the tribes of Israel. Gideon, though, wasn't of the tribe of Ephraim. He was of the tribe of Manasseh. There had been a sibling rivalry between these tribes going all the way back to the days of their father Joseph, because Manasseh, Joseph's younger son, received the birthright instead of Ephraim. After Gideon's death, even though Gideon had refused to allow his family to rule over Israel, it is only natural to assume that Gideon's family, as large as it was, would continue to have a leadership role in Israel. Abimelech used this mistrust between the two tribes to his advantage. Being the son of Gideon through Gideon's concubine in Shechem, Abimelech could be said to have kinship with those in Shechem, a city that lay in the boundaries of Ephraim. So he went to them with a proposal. Which is better, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon, reign over you, or that one reign over you, namely him? The people of Shechem determined that it would be better if one ruled over them, especially if that one was from among their kin. So they decided to follow Abimelech. But what to do with Gideon's sons? Surely as long as they lived, Israel would be inclined to follow them. Well, that's where Abimelech's conspiracy to murder his brothers came into being and was executed. Out of the temple of Baal-berith, Israel's idol god at the time, they gave Abimelech 70 shekels of silver, which he then used to hire worthless and reckless men who would do his bidding. All of them went up together to Ophrah and killed Abimelech's brothers, with the exception of one, Jotham, who hid himself. Remember this man Jotham, for he will be the focus of the next lesson. With Gideon's children now dead, there would be no obstacle to making Abimelech king, and so the men of Shechem, along with the men of Beth-milo near Shechem, made Abimelech king. Now, just because Abimelech was king and judge didn't mean that God approved of Abimelech, for he didn't, and would send retribution for Abimelech's treachery in due time. But let's also not take away from this that Abimelech was somehow not a judge in Israel. He was. He was an evil judge. He was one whom God didn't appoint, but he was a judge nonetheless, one that Israel followed. We'll continue with this, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Judges chapter 9, verses 7 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.